Hello, and welcome to the South by Southwest session, Reimagining the Fan Experience After the Pandemic. We've all had a crazy year, no more so than in sports. My name is Sarah Spivey. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer of Braze. For those of you not familiar with us, we are a consumer engagement platform that brands use to help forge more human connections with their consumers. And no more brand love than the three folks I have with me today representing the WWE, Brian Flynn, representing the NBA, Kate Javeri, and representing the National Hockey League, Heidi Browning. So we're going to dive right in. And the first topic really is just around how you kind of got to where you got to in 2020. Obviously, things came to a screeching halt come February and March, and everybody was scrambling to kind of pivot with a pause or some without a pause. So I thought we'd just start with having each of you kind of introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your approaches, because all three of them were just a little different, and then we'll go from there. So Brian, why don't you kick us off?
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having us. So Brian Flynn, I'm the CMO here at WWE, and our story is a little different than many in the sports and entertainment world, in that we didn't pause. When the world was sort of coming to a halt, we took a look at our mission statement, quite frankly, putting smiles on people's faces, and we really leaned into it. You know, the world was under enormous pressure, and we wanted to create a diversion from the hard times that people were having. And while some might think that's cliche, we took the responsibility quite seriously, and really worked down two paths. One was we had to create the infrastructure for our employees so that they could continue to contribute and collaborate. And that was a heavy lift, making sure that we had all the production capabilities across all of our departments for people to be in a work at home environment. And that was one path that we were charging down quite furiously. And then on the flip side, we had to figure out how we could continue to produce our content. And then for some context, we produce 7 hours of primetime programming every week. 3 hours on Monday nights on USA, 2 hours on Wednesday nights on USA, and another 2 hours on Friday nights on Fox. And back in March, our Monday show in Washington, D.C. went off without a hitch. Our Wednesday show, for unrelated circumstances, was actually being filmed out of our performance center in Orlando, Florida. Our performance center is a training facility that you would find in Heidi and Kate's worlds of, you know, the Premier Hockey League, the premier hockey teams and premier basketball teams, 27,000 square foot facility where we train athletes of all disciplines from around the world. We changed that facility into a production facility for that show that night and decided after that Wednesday night telecast to keep it intact because the world seemed to be closing down quite quickly. And sure enough, our show on Friday night in Detroit wasn't going to take place. And so we quickly pivoted and moved that Fox broadcast down to Orlando and kept going and never really stopped. In fact, we were on the brink of our largest event of the year, WrestleMania, and decided to do that show from our performance center, expanded it to 2 nights, made it the first 2-night spectacle in our history, and just kept plowing through in an attempt to keep that entertainment and that diversion from these challenging times alive.
Yeah. The Thunderdome became quite the destination, the online destination for sure. How about you, Heidi? Talk a little bit about the NHL.
So we paused on March 13th, and that was the moment that everything focused on our digital and social platforms, right? That was the one piece of connectivity that we had with our fans because we couldn't have fans in buildings anymore. And we started out really focusing on health and safety messaging and really connecting into the community and giving back, and then focused on how do we highlight some of the human moments around our players. And so that became a whole theme for us. We call it the humans are greater than highlights. And we focused on our fans and our players, showcasing their lives, their wives, their, what they're watching on Netflix, what they're eating, they're doing their workouts, like all the stuff our fans crave. But our hockey players have been shy about sharing that part of their lives with their fandom. But we were all having this collective experience at home, and so they participated in it as much as our fans did. We created a ton of content, much like Brian and Kate did, and it was a bit of a scramble to get all of our editing bays sort of readjusted to working from home and producing shows that we also aired on broadcast as well as our digital and social channels. But what we were doing was taking some of these things that we're sourcing from the digital channels and then broadcasting it. So we created a whole show around hockey at home. Those are the moments where our fans were showing their fan caves, they were showing their skills off, they were telling us how much they miss hockey, and we wove that together into a really nice narrative that we aired on broadcast. We also created things like hat trick trivia, where we would find a fan to answer trivia with PK Subban. We'd bring in a player and do a little surprise and delight, and that was fun and also aired. And then we did things like Skates and Plates, where we got top chefs preparing food with our top players in their own homes, respective homes, and had some really great and fun recipes there. So for us, the theme was really focusing on those human moments, also making sure that we were staying connected to and honoring our frontline workers and our communities and giving back. Because it was a time, for us all to rally together around that. And a lot of the best practices that we learned during this, creativity moment in the pause, we're continuing to weave through our business today. And I think one of the biggest lessons we learned is we have a whole team of Emmy award-winning producers that work at the NHL creating content for us all the time. We had to do content that wasn't perfectly produced for the first time ever. And that's hard, taking a look at, a cell phone video versus a perfectly, beautifully edited piece. But we know from all the data analytics that our fans actually gravitate to the real and the raw when they're on the social and digital channels. And so that became another theme for us, this combination of highly produced content married with some of this lower production, real and raw content to drive our fan engagement.
We'll talk about the restart in a little bit. I want Kate to quickly talk about the NBA. How long did the pause last for the NHL? I kind of don't remember.
We were about on the similar tracks, right, Kate? So it was 4 months, I want to say, 3 or 4 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, for us it was 20 weeks. So we paused our season March 11th when a player tested positive just before tip-off of a game that night. And similar to what both Brian and Heidi are talking about, there were real challenges at that time. If you remember back to the very early part of the pandemic, we knew so little about COVID-19, and so we really felt that we needed to pause our season and follow the science as we continued to learn more. And so that put us in an interesting position of really thinking about what content would look like for our fans without live games on TV. And at the same time, while we were running after the ways that we could safely resume playing, we knew that we had this moment to be super creative and to engage our players who were just as shocked as we were to have to stop their season. And we have the benefit of having an enormous social media footprint. We have 1.9 billion followers across league, team, and player accounts. And so it was incredibly natural for us to really think about, in this hiatus, how we would build a program that was really a hybrid of digital and broadcast content, but really focused on engaging fans in that space where they already are used to engaging with the NBA. And so we started a program called NBA Together that was a blend of, as Heidi said, the social good components and really helping to quench the thirst of our fans who really had no understanding or needed to learn more about how to stay safe with COVID-19. And we were really able to leverage our players to be a great voice here and our platform. We produced over 45 PSAs and raised over $100 million for frontline workers and COVID relief. And at the same time, to Brian's point, fans were really craving an escape. How do I immerse myself in something other than what's going on in the world? And so we created a great deal of content that we put out, like Heidi said, really trying a number of different things that we had never tried before, like trivia contests, like whip arounds. And what we really focused on was how could we get fans to engage, not just how could we broadcast content to them, but how could they engage with us to really form that and keep that community going. And so we had fan participation, and we also looked to put some things on broadcast. So we had our first ever 2K Players Tournament where Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Trae Young participated in the first ever broadcast player 2K tournament. Also, we tried a number of different really classics for basketball, like horse. And what we were able to see is, to Heidi's point, what works really well on social maybe doesn't work so well on broadcast, and what works really well on broadcast doesn't have that same fidelity on social. And so for us, it was a really great opportunity to harness our focus, which is always on technology, innovation, and creativity, and really push ourselves in new ways to meet fans where they are with the kind of content that they were looking for at that time. And we continue to do that now as we, both looked at the restart last season, and as we're going through this season. A lot of those ideas and content is still present today.
Yeah, let's talk about the restart. So, you created this incredible sort of cohesion in the pause period, and then as live games started to come back, like how did you then think about pulling in these virtual experiences into those live events? Like I know there were virtual fans, and by the time the NBA came back, we'd graduated from the cardboard fans to virtual fans. But talk a little bit about kind of that virtual experience coming back into the live event.
Absolutely. We have the privilege and the benefit of always innovating around a variety of our tentpoles, whether it's in Summer League, where we try a number of different camera angles and microphones, or whether it's in our G League, where we also try a variety of different broadcast types. And so we were really excited to bring some of the technology and innovation that we had been focused on over the last couple of years right back into the restart. And so you mentioned the virtual fans. That was one of my favorites. Over 172 NBA regular season games during the restart. There were 60,000 virtual fans that participated in those games. And so you were able to cheer along with friends. The players in the arena could hear you. And it really helped to give that home court feel that really we wanted to ensure that players had, especially as we were going into the postseason, that you could feel the energy from your fans in the arena in Orlando. We also really wanted to focus on health and safety. Obviously, that was why we stopped the season initially. And so we had been really focused on health and safety in the bubble with players, and we wanted to continue that dialogue with our fans and really keep them engaged in how to stay safe as well. So that narrative didn't really. We still continue to talk about that with our fans today, all the way through to talking about vaccines and how to stay safe. In the restart, what we found was when you put players in an environment where they are together 24/7, you get a lot of naturally amazing content, not to mention the amazing basketball that was on the court and some of just the absolute fantastic games that we got to see through the restart. But we also saw players just really enjoying their lives, whether that's Taco Fall riding around the campus on bikes, Jimmy Butler starting a coffee franchise called Big Face Coffee, where he was selling to his fellow players, or if it was just tagging along with players as they went on fishing trips or got ready for the night's games. We were able to provide a level of access to fans to really get close to the game and the players, and really provide them a way into experiencing what was happening in Restart, not just through what was being broadcast on TV, but also through all of the great digital content that both players and the league were creating for fans to really feel that connection.
Yeah. Brian, when we did our prep for this call, you talked a little bit about kind of the surprise in, other channels outside of live. You specifically brought up e-commerce, and I know, Heidi, you talked a little bit about kind of the just crazy rise in esports. So maybe, Brian, you can start on kind of talking about what you saw in other venues, channels, whatever you want to call them, as a result of the change in the live venue experience.
Sure. But certainly the work that we've been doing to create an omni-channel experience is years in the making. We've got great retail partners, the Walmarts and Targets of the world, Smiths outside of the US. But certainly the shift towards e-commerce has been developing for the better part of 5-10 years. And certainly we saw the acceleration of all these digital trends really spike in March and April. I think the success that we had really was about the work that had been done for the past year and a half in prepping ourselves for that omni-channel experience. But we were thankfully prepared for the acceleration that hit in March and April. And certainly our venue business went to zero as we stopped our traditional live events. And thankfully, our planning, our long-term planning in the e-commerce space, and making sure that the experience that you can deliver at retail, which for our superstars, you can actually take them and put them into a retail environment and interact with fans in that space. How do you create a dynamic e-commerce experience? No friction, great product experience. And we had put all those plans in place. And so we were fairly certain that 2020 was going to be a strong year for us, no matter what, when it comes to e-com. But no one could have anticipated the complete shift that we saw. And the net of it for us was that the e-commerce business actually sort of saved the venue business that went away. We were able to make up all of those losses with a really robust offering across the e-com space.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really just about those accelerated trends that you saw across all facets of the digital landscape. And for us, e-com was certainly one that we were able to take advantage of.
So another accelerated trend, Heidi, was certainly the rise in esports. And I know it really exploded for NHL fans. Can you talk a little bit about that? Surprised or not surprised?
Well, we were all at home with nothing to do, so it wasn't surprising that esports would be, your go-to entertainment. And, when we first paused, our club started to do all kinds of interesting experiments. Like we played sim games to play out the rest of the regular season. We were only weeks away from going into our playoffs. We were streaming, live streaming on Twitch, but then also airing it on broadcast. And so, again, trying to experiment with, what kind of interest and engagement can we have on the digital platforms as well as the broadcast platforms. We did a number of tournaments where we were, playing. Xavier Woods played against, our NHL players in a tournament. We were trying to cross-pollinate athletes and influencers in the gaming world and other entertainment properties to make sure that we're tapping into and expanding beyond just our hardcore hockey fan base. And that esports continued throughout the playoffs, and it was one of the more popular things for our players to do while they were in their bubbles. We had 2 bubbles. Both of them were in Canada. We eventually moved down to 1, but the bubble experience was really extraordinary for us as well, with the emphasis on health and safety. Some of our players were there for 70 days in these bubbles in Canada, and which is when you're an athlete, that has an incredible impact and shift in your mental preparation for the game. So the bubbles were not easy, but they were effective in terms of getting our games back on the ice. And I think one of of the neatest aspects of this is when we were trying to bring made-for-TV experience to everyone's homes, we were trying to think about how can we bring the sight, sound, and emotion back into your home. So the new camera angles were really cool, but the mic'd up moments and the work that we did with piping and fan sounds was the most interesting because at first we were piping the fan sounds in for the broadcast, and that was great. But what we realized is that the players, it was quiet in the buildings, and the players really need that fan feedback. They thrive off of it. So we had the best of the best. They had the right sounds at the right time, at the right level. And it was so realistic that when you were sitting in a building, you actually thought fans were there. But that was really important for our players. And then that sort of connection with the fans at home is so important. You know, NBA did such a great job having the fans participate through their viewing screens. We approached it a little differently. And we did co-watching parties, and then we had fan engagement programs because one of the warm-up signs. One of the most popular things that kids do is they bring their signs to the games and put them up against the glass, and the players, take a selfie with it. And so we brought that digitally to the players. So we did a call for warm-up signs. The signs were then shown to the players in the arena on these giant screens when they were practicing. And then we would then reward the fan back by taking a picture of the player seeing the sign and post it on the player accounts or the club accounts or NHL accounts. So closing the loop on that fan-player connection, that human connection that we were trying to recreate virtually.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've noticed, and I've certainly, when I've heard players interviewed from the NHL and the NBA and other leagues as well, NFL too, you always think about live sports as being about the fans, but the players need the fans just as much as the fans need the players. And I'm not sure I was as aware of that as I became this year in terms of the impact that it had on the players playing in empty stadiums, even with piped in sound or so trying to make them feel like they were a part of it as well as the fan was just as big of a piece with the players, which I found really interesting. I want to switch gears a little bit, which is, kind of what have you learned from all this, right? Like what were the big lessons? What did the fans really react to? Surprises, maybe things that you thought were going to be great and the fans were like, no. I'm just curious kind of as you went through this and kind of had to continue pivoting. So we'll start with Brian on kind of, what lessons you learned, what changes you made, and then we'll close up with kind of what are you going to do going forward.
Sure. So, really our Thunderdome experience to Heidi's point, and Kate certainly saw it as well, that interactivity was so critical. For us, fans are actually cast members of our show, right? I guess it's something similar to home court advantage, right? Where fans are really into supporting that home team. For us, though, there's a level of interactivity that actually changes the ebbs and flows of the show. Whether our performers are changing the physicality in the ring based on crowd reaction, the art of improv, or what they're saying to the crowd. And so that level of interactivity is so critical. And when we were able to bring the Thunderdome experience to fruition in August, that dynamic was there. And in fact, our performers tested us. We told them 0 latency, right? You say something, you do something in the ring, people are going to react immediately. And they challenged us and they tested us, and the technology works. But that interactivity was so key that behind the scenes, we actually had our superstars going into the Thunderdome and talking to our fans during commercial breaks and having sort of that discussion. And we found, not surprisingly, how wonderful our fans were in their response, right? They loved that level of engagement. And we sort of took that on the road and created these virtual fan experiences where we were having fans logging in and talking to our superstars, holding 2 and 3 minute conversations with them on a regular basis, on a weekly basis. So we're doing hundreds of these experiences where fans get a chance to meet their real life superheroes. And that was always done in person. And now we've taken it to the digital world. And we've realized that moving forward, this is going to be an opportunity for us internationally, right? We no longer need to travel people, to India and to China and to the UK, to Latin America. We of course will do that when the time is right, but your ability to make those connections with people are real in a digital environment, and can keep your brand alive and active in markets that might be a little bit harder to make those superheroes come to life. So certainly that level of interactivity is something that we knew was important, but we didn't realize how tactical it was going to be, and the sort of legs that it's going to have for us moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I do think one of the lessons we've all learned, I mean, even at Braze, as we kind of pivoted our events to more virtual, is the amount of accessibility it opens up to people who wouldn't participate otherwise, right? And whether it's because it's a physical location, or it's, you know, the cost of travel to a venue, whatever it happens to be, the price of a ticket, like the accessibility is really, I think, for us, a big takeaway in terms of as we think going forward. Once we can return to the physical world, we really want to keep some of those virtual, you know, pluses, right? Because it just opens up so many more individuals to be able to participate than we had in a physical sense. So, Kate, I wanted to shift you just in terms of kind of, you know, learnings and what works. Like, what was maybe the biggest surprise for you coming out of the bubble in terms of fan experience?
I don't know if it was a surprise per se, but we definitely heard from our fans where they want to see the experience with the NBA continue to grow. And so, you know, we learned through this pandemic that you have to meet your fans where they are with the type of content and experiences that they're looking for. To your point, Sarah, like a lot of that is much more easily done, you know, with the internet and the ability to reach them across so many different channels. But there were really three main areas that we identified coming out of the restart, and really that we've continued in this season. One is access. So this idea of really providing fans more access, whether that's actually in the live game with new camera angles or microphone positions, or the ability to hear, you know, refs and coaches. The fans really, really enjoy that access. And then also off the court access. How do we provide more engagement around the fun stuff? You know, we're used to seeing great tunnel walks of players coming into the building, but how can we blow that out and continue to build really great content that provides fans access? The second was community. And I think we knew for a long time, you know, we call it the NBA family. We have a really big community that engages with our brand all the time. But community is really evolving. And it's not just about sampling content on TV or on digital. It is about that back and forth. And how do you have a conversation around that? You know, with TikTok challenges, how do you do the exact same dunk that one of your favorite players is able to do? That kind of part of the community and the ability to interact with other fans who care about the same things that you do, that was a really big learning for us. Mm-hmm. And we're going to continue to invest there. And then lastly is personalization. Obviously, you know, marketing is going in this direction and has been for a while, but this idea that the content can be personalized based on what you're interested in. So you can listen on, you know, our digital properties. You could listen to a game called by influencers, or you could listen to a bet stream that has odds and is talking about different aspects of the game, or you could watch the broadcast that a lot of us are used to and watch on TV. The idea that fans can choose how they see the game that they love is something that we continue to invest in, and that we heard loud and clear from our fans over the hiatus and in last season, that they want to continue. And so we're absolutely focused on those areas, and we'll be continuing investments in those as, you know, as we continue through this season and certainly into next season.
Yeah. Heidi, I wanted to check in with you on, you know, we talked about this off camera earlier, but tech investments that came into play, or things that maybe had been like, oh yeah, we'll do that next year. Like, what really just got massively accelerated for you relative to being able to pull all this off that maybe wasn't in your plan, that you had had to do quickly?
Well, there's so many tech investments that are required as we prepare our arenas for bringing fans back into the arenas, right? You can imagine the whole live event experience is going to be transformed due to this pandemic, and things have been accelerated as a result of that. For example, if we want to be cashless, touchless, we need to have 5G installed in all the arenas. And if we want to keep having these hybrid experiences where we're taking the best of the digital and virtual worlds that everyone's enjoying from their couches at home, and then allowing fans in the arena to also experience those things while they're in the arena. So interacting with some of the watch parties and AR and VR, those all require substantial, service, 5G services to be able to work. So you're seeing that acceleration across all the arenas, especially those that we share with the NBA on that front. For us, returning to play was kind of interesting because of the challenges with travel. So we had to realign our divisions because we couldn't have our teams travel between Canada and the US. And so that's opened up a really interesting dynamic in terms of intensifying the rivalries. We have an all Canadian division, and people are loving it. And we have
the Canadians.
Yes. And so we're really focused on, with our clubs, taking the best that we learned from our bubbles and applying it and experimenting with new technologies in each of the different markets. So that's continuing. And then the other, aspect of it is really that note that Kate talked about as well, from that getting our fans to participate in our marketing programs. So it started with our Hockey at Home, and it's continuing through. We've got a whole theme around See Me, where we're recognizing fans from around the world, whether it's their greatest skills that they've got or their fan caves or, whatnot. But we've expanded that into what we call the Creator of the Week program. And we're really highlighting some incredible, talented people who might have arts and crafts or just have incredible skills, and bringing that into our life. And right now I'm here in Tahoe. We just did our outdoor game. It was the most glorious outdoor setting that we've ever seen. We brought in drones. We brought in a lot of technology to really make it an extraordinary television experience. We couldn't control the sun, however, so we had a bit of a pause, but it was a glorious experience. But again, weaving in that fan at home experience, we did a whole outdoor campaign where fans around the world were showing us their skating moments on frozen ponds in the Alps, in Alberta, in backyards in Minnesota. It was really, really extraordinary. So we're going to continue to build on that as we roll into the rest of our season, and continue to encourage our clubs to experiment with technologies that are working for them. I think the second screen experience there is the new flavor for a lot of technology companies right now, and we tested 4 or 5 of them through the course of the season, and they're all kind of pivoting in the terms of what kinds of feature sets they're offering based on how fans are engaging with co-watching and then chatting and then using AR. And so that's going to be, I think, a really interesting space for us to watch for the future.
Yeah. Brian, what about you with WWE? Like, what are we're definitely keeping this in the mix even after we return to, sort of pre-pandemic live events.
Much like Heidi mentioned, so much of the investment is being made around production, right? So as a touring property, once we get back to that place, the benefit that we have is all the investments that NBA teams and NHL teams make in their buildings. We play in those buildings as well. So we can sort of capitalize on all the infrastructure that's been built at that point. So we spend our time investing in production, and much of those things will transition through to the live event experience. Now, of course, you can't shoot pyro over seats when there are actual human beings sitting in them. So things like that aren't going to happen. But really the graphics, the AR integrations that we put into our shows to make them even more captivating, those are the types of things that we're going to be focused on moving forward with. Not to mention, the amount of digital content that we're going to continue to create. Kate mentioned the TikToks of the world, and Heidi was talking about Esports, and those channels are incredibly important to us. Not only do we focus on the verticals of in-ring content, but we create verticals around lifestyle. And so, making sure that you have points of connection with fans, where they are and where their interests lie. And certainly esports is one where our performers and our fans have a lot of common ground. And our YouTube presence called Up, Up, Down, Down in the esports world is another area where we're going to continue to invest. So it's really for us all about production, more content, more points of connection, more verticals, and really aligning with what our fans' interests are that have natural adjacencies to our in-ring product.
Mm-hmm. Kate, I was going to ask you, do you feel like you've acquired a whole different set of fans that you didn't have pre-pandemic? Has this kind of opened up people who maybe weren't, I wouldn't say not interested, but just kind of not aware of the NBA? Has the virtual world changed acquisition at all?
For us, we have fans all over the world, and less than 1% of our fans will ever be able to attend a game in arena. And so as we've thought about this, this evolution of digital content and the access and the community and the personalization that I spoke about earlier, it's really opened up the opportunity for us to provide more of the in-arena experience and the behind-the-scenes experience that maybe you can feel while attending a game to folks who are sitting all around the world. Mm-hmm. Will not be able to see a game either due to location or other reasons. And so for us, I think it was more about opening the aperture and the opportunity for us to speak more and to overcome gaps that naturally happen when you can't necessarily watch a game on your time zone or in person. The things that we are investing in really have a beneficial effect across all of the regions where we have fans today, and I definitely think that will continue to grow across the world due to a lot of these investments because personalization matters more than ever as you start to think about different audiences around the globe.
Yeah. I wanted to close out with just a recognition of how much all three of your leagues have done from kind of a community service perspective during this whole period. I'll start with Heidi, and then you two can get to think on this one while she's speaking. Like, what are you most proud of in terms of your kind of, NHL for good, NBA for good, in terms of your connection with community and sort of public service?
Well, I think one extraordinary campaign that we created together was the Real Heroes Project. We had 13 major league sports come together very early on in the pandemic, around April, to recognize that these frontline workers, they were going through some really, really tough times. And we wanted to take a moment to celebrate and honor them. And so we, the CMOs of all the leagues gathered together, and we worked on the Real Heroes Project, where we each had athletes take the jerseys off their back, write the name of a healthcare hero on the, cover up their name, write the name of a healthcare hero on the back of the jersey, and then share a personal message back to that healthcare hero. And we wove it together into a beautiful film, and it was just extraordinary. Millions and millions of views around the world, and it was a wonderful experience to be able to collaborate with my colleagues across all of the sports world. It was easy, and we're picking up and doing it again, and using our platforms to partner with the Ad Council to work on a vaccine campaign so that we can safely get our fans back in our buildings and give them the games and the sports they crave.
Yeah, fantastic project, and reached obviously probably collectively with all the leagues billions of people.
Yes,
internationally. So, Brian, Kate, anything to add on to that?
The only thing that I would add is that we have such great partners across the community space, and certainly the COVID era has put a lot of pressure on how you can activate those partnerships and how you can make those connections. And partnerships like the Special Olympics and Boys and Girls Clubs of America, where our superstars are so active with those organizations and really have deep-rooted connections there. We've really leaned into the digital space to continue to make sure that that relationship stays strong, whether it's encouraging the Special Olympics athletes to continue on with their fitness regimens by training with them online, or how do you create video content that can be distributed across those Boys and Girls Clubs networks to encourage them to continue with education. Those are things that are really important when people feel isolated and don't have the points of connection or the inspiration that they're used to having on a regular basis. And that's where, the sort of beauty of the real life superheroes, and, obviously ours are comic book characters that have come to life, or athletes across professional sports who also serve in that same superhero spectrum. I think it's really important for us to continue to make sure that those points of connection aren't lost, even though the human connection, that person-to-person connection just isn't available to us right now. That's where we've spent a lot of our time over the past year, making sure that those relationships stay really strong, because the partnerships are really important to the organization.
Yeah.
For me, I'm most proud of the fact that the NBA, which has long been a values-driven organization, has really shown those values over the last year and a half or so since we really stepped into this pandemic. And so whether that is through the Real Heroes Project, like Heidi mentioned, or NBA Together, and the work that we've done to really celebrate frontline workers, help keep our fans safe, and obviously the investments that we're making in health and safety protocols, both to be able to successfully pull off the NBA restart without a single positive case, or to what we're doing every day and every game this season to really ensuring the players continue to stay safe and are able to get back to the game that they love, and that these learnings will really help us to welcome fans back in arenas when they are able. And I think the second thing, obviously, is this values-led organization has really spoken up in terms of other social issues that really impacted this year. For us, this goes back 70 years in our history, and where we've really seen people stand up at the darkest of times. And I've been really proud as a league about how we've been able to address the social injustice and really thinking about how we can move beyond rhetoric and into action. So whether it is the establishment of the first ever NBA Foundation that is really focused on access of education and opportunity for people of color, or whether it's the NBA Coalition, where governors, players, and coaches and league staff work together to really look at critical issues like law enforcement reform, or access to education. We really have been investing in this and really speaking up for what it is that we know we believe in as an organization, and also what we know our players really care about. And I think you started by saying that this year has been very tough, and it has been a lot of different things that we've all had to deal with, both in terms as fans and as marketers. And I think I'm just really proud of the NBA at really being able to speak to its values, however they manifest this year.
Yeah, well, all three of your leagues really have stepped up in a variety of ways, and it's been much appreciated obviously by the fans, but also by all the communities that you serve. One last question, rapid fire. I'll start with Heidi. What are you personally most looking forward to when you can get back into an arena?
Well, after just seeing live hockey for the first time in almost a year, I am so excited to have it back, but in a full building of fans.
Yep. Kate?
Yeah, I think when we can have full arenas of fans back, I'm going to actually just close my eyes and listen. For a while, because I think the sounds of the sneakers on the court, of the swish of the hoops, and obviously of fans enjoying the game is something that I really want to kind of relish.
Yeah. And Brian, what about you?
Not so dissimilar, but I really think there's that communal boom that is on the horizon, and it may be a slow ramp to ultimately get there. But human interaction is a real healthy thing, and I think it will be amazing to see groups of people come together for something that they're uber passionate about. And to Kate's point, the roar of the crowd in that environment is going to be something certainly to sit back and just listen and feel.
Right.
And
Very
that'll
special.
be really interesting.
I want to thank all three of you participating. This was great. I learned a lot about some of your virtual tactics. I'm sure others did too. And wish you guys all the best on getting through your current seasons and hopefully getting back to whatever the next normal is. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
You.